Imagine rushing to work and suddenly finding a lost child. What would you do? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hillary looked at the clock for the 10th time in 5 minutes, her heart racing with each passing second. She knew she was late for a crucial meeting at work, a presentation that could define her career. But something kept her from simply ignoring the scene unfolding before her. A small boy, no more than 6 years old, stood alone on the sidewalk, silent tears streaming down his dirty face. Hillary watched for a few moments, waiting for an adult to appear to claim the lost child. But no one came. The minutes dragged on, and Hillary felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. Every second that passed was another second of delay, a greater risk to his career. But how could she just turn her back on a child in danger? His mind raced with possibilities. She could call the police. But how long would it take for them to arrive? I could try to find the boy's parents. But what if they weren't around? What if something terrible happened to the child while he was busy saving his own skin? Hillary closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her decision. Career, reputation, success, all this could wait. A life was at stake, and she couldn't ignore it. With shaking hands, she picked up the phone to say she would be late for the meeting. The words left her mouth hesitantly as she made up a vague excuse about a family emergency. She could hear the disappointment in her boss's voice, but it didn't matter right now. Putting away her phone, Hillary approached the boy, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she had made the right choice. The clock continued to tick, but now she was running for something much more important than a simple meeting. Hillary cautiously approached the boy, her heart breaking as she saw the fear and confusion in the child's eyes. She crouched down to his level, offering a gentle smile. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Hillary. Are you okay?" The boy sniffed, rubbing his eyes with the back of his dirty hands. I don't know where my mother is," he whispered. "It's okay," Hillary assured. "Let's find her together. What's your name?" "Carlos," the boy replied shyly. Hillary smiled again. "Nice to meet you, Carlos. Can you tell me what happened?" Little by little, between sobs and hesitations, Carlos told his story. He was in the park with his mother, playing happily, when he saw a cute puppy. Excited, Carlos ran after the animal without realizing how far he was getting. When he finally stopped, he could no longer see his mother or recognize where he was. Hillary listened intently, her heart clenching at the boy's anguish. She looked around, hoping to see some sign of the desperate mother searching for her son. But the street remained eerily empty. "Do you remember the name of the park, Carlos?" Hillary asked gently. Carlos shook his head, more tears streaming down his cheeks. "There was a big blue slide," he muttered. Hillary nodded, her mind working quickly. She knew of a park like that not far away. Maybe that would be a good place to start. "Carlos," she said, "how about we go together and look for your mother? I promise I won't leave you alone until we find her, okay?" The boy hesitated for a moment, years of warnings about not talking to strangers echoing in his young mind. But there was something about Hillary's gentle smile, the softness of her voice, that made him trust her. Slowly, Carlos reached out his small hand, clinging to Hillary's fingers as if they were a lifeline. Hillary felt a wave of protection and determination wash over her. She would find this boy's mother, no matter what it took. Hillary looked up at the sky, noticing the dark clouds that were quickly approaching. Rain was imminent, and they still hadn't found Carlos's mother. They had walked through the park and nearby streets, asking every person they came across, but no one had seen a woman looking for her son. Carlos was exhausted, his small steps becoming slower and slower. Hillary could see the fear and exhaustion in the boy's eyes, and her heart broke once again. It was then that she made a decision that, on any other day, would have seemed crazy. she decided to take Carlos to her home. "Carlos," she said softly, "it's getting late and it's going to rain. How about we go to my house? We can call the police there and continue looking for your mother where it's safe and dry." The boy looked at her with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "But what if my mother comes looking for me here?" Hillary thought for a moment. "Let's leave a note in the park," she suggested. "Let's write down where we are and how your mother can find us." Carlos reluctantly agreed, and together they wrote a note and left it tied to a park bench. As they walked to Hillary's apartment, she couldn't help but think about how surreal the situation was. Here she was, taking an unknown child into her home, risking her reputation and potentially her freedom. If someone misinterpreted your actions. But looking at Carlos, seeing the trust he placed in her, Hillary knew she was doing the right thing. She would protect this boy until he was safe in his mother's arms, no matter what. What should have been a simple 20-minute walk to the office had turned into an unexpected journey of compassion and hope. Hillary looked at Carlos, who was walking beside her, his small hand tightly clasped in hers. Every step they took was a reminder of how drastically their day had changed. Instead of slides and graphs, Hillary now navigated familiar streets with new eyes, looking for any sign of Carlos's mother. People passing by cast curious glances at the unlikely duo, a businesswoman in formal attire and a small, disheveled boy. Hillary could feel their stares, but she refused to be intimidated. She knew she was doing the right thing, even if it seemed strange to others. As they walked, Hillary spoke softly to Carlos, trying to keep him calm and distracted. She asked about his school, his friends, his favorite toys. Little by little, the fear in the boy's eyes gave way to cautious confidence. At every corner, Hillary expected to see a desperate mother searching for her lost son. With each face that passed, she looked for a sign of recognition. But the long-awaited meeting did not happen. As they approached her apartment, Hillary felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was about to cross a line, bringing a stranger, a child no less, into her home. But looking at Carlos, seeing the confidence in his eyes, she knew she had no choice. This journey, which started as a simple commute to work, had turned into something much bigger. It was a journey of compassion, of doing the right thing even when it's hard. And as they walked up the stairs to her apartment, Hillary knew that no matter what happened next, she had been forever changed by this unexpected experience. Hillary turned the key in the lock, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to expect when she opened the door to her apartment. She certainly wasn't prepared for the scene that awaited her. Sitting on her couch, her eyes red from crying, was a woman Hillary instantly recognized as her new neighbor, who had moved downstairs just a week before, and next to her, a police officer was taking notes on a pad. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then Carlos let out a cry of joy. "Mommy!" The woman jumped to her feet, her eyes widening in shock and relief. "Carlos! Oh my God, Carlos!" Mother and son ran to each other, hugging each other tightly, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Hillary stood in the doorway, stunned by the turn of events. The officer approached, a relieved smile on his face. "Looks like we have our little missing person back," he said. "You must be Hillary. The neighbor mentioned that you might be late for work today." Hillary nodded, still unable to form words. His mind reeled at the incredible coincidence. All this time, Carlos's mother was so close. Carlos's mother finally pulled away from the hug, turning her attention to Hillary. "I can't believe it. How did you find him? Where?" Hillary briefly explained what had happened, how she had found Carlos alone on the street and decided to help. With each word, the mother's face lit up with gratitude. "I can never thank you enough," she said, tears still streaming down her face. "You saved my son." As the officer asked a few final questions and prepared to leave, Hillary finally felt the weight of the day settle on her. She had missed her important meeting, likely putting her career at risk. But looking at Carlos, safe in his mother's arms, she knew she would do it all again in a heartbeat. This experience had taught him something precious about compassion, courage, and the surprising connections that bind us together. And as she said goodbye to Carlos and his mother, promising to have coffee soon, Hillary knew that this day, with all its unexpected twists, would forever be etched in her memory as a reminder of the power of a simple act of kindness. Hillary sat in her favorite armchair, hands shaking as she held a now cold cup of tea. His eyes wandered around the room, landing on each framed photo, each carefully preserved memory. But there was an empty space on the shelf, a hole in her heart that no photograph could fill. 5 years ago, his life had changed forever. She could still feel the weight of her newborn son in her arms, hear his soft cries echoing through the hospital hallways. Thomas, she had called him, after her grandfather. But destiny had other plans. One night, as Hillary slept exhausted after days of intense care, someone entered her apartment. When she woke up, the crib was empty. Thomas had disappeared without a trace. The days that followed were a blur of police interrogations, frantic searches, and sleepless nights. Hillary walked down every street, every alley, shouting her son's name until her voice broke. But Thomas was never found. As the months turned into years, the world around him moved on. Well-meaning friends suggested that she get on with her life, as if the loss of a child was something that could be overcome with time. Hillary immersed herself in her work, building a successful career that kept her busy enough not to think about what she had lost. But on the silent nights, when the rest of the world slept, the pain resurfaced. She found herself imagining what Thomas would be like now. Did he have her eyes? Dad's smile? Would you be happy, wherever you were? Hillary had never completely given up hope. Every child on the street caught his attention. Every family reunion story made his heart skip a beat. But as the years passed, she learned to keep that hope in a safe corner of her heart, protecting her from the skepticism of the world. Now, sitting in her living room, Hillary felt the weight of 5 years of grief and hope. She didn't know that the universe was about to offer her a second chance, an opportunity to heal the wounds of the past in a way she never could have imagined. Hillary watched Carlos sleeping on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket. There was something familiar about that serene little face, something that made her heart squeeze in a way she couldn't explain. While waiting for the police to arrive, she decided to call the boy's mother, whose number was written down on a piece of paper in her bag. With shaking hands, she dialed the number. A female voice answered, sounding anxious and hopeful. Hillary explained the situation, ensuring that Carlos was safe. "Thank God," the woman sighed in relief. "I'm Sarah, Carlos's adoptive mother. We were so worried." The words foster mother echoed in Hillary's mind. His heart started to beat faster. "Sarah," Hillary began hesitantly, "may I ask, how long has Carlos been with you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Almost 5 years," Sarah replied. "He was adopted when he was just a baby." Hillary's world seemed to stop. 5 years. The exact age your Thomas would be now. With a shaking voice, Hillary asked more questions. Carlos's date of birth, where he was adopted. Each answer made his heart beat faster, his mind spin faster. When she hung up the phone, Hillary looked at Carlos with new eyes. Dark hair like hers, the shape of the chin, so similar to Hillary's father, and that little birthmark behind his ear. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. This boy, this sweet, lost boy that she had found by chance, was her Thomas, his long-lost son. Hillary fell to her knees beside the couch, silent tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream with joy, hug Carlos, no, Thomas, and never let go. But I also knew the situation was incredibly complicated. This boy had a life, a foster family that loved him. As she watched her son sleeping peacefully, Hillary knew her life was about to change drastically once again. The question was, what would she do now? Hillary spent the night awake, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts. Every few minutes she got up to check on Carlos, no, Thomas, making sure he was still there, that it wasn't all a cruel dream. On one hand, her heart screamed to hug her lost son and never let him go. 5 years of pain and longing seemed about to be healed in a miraculous instant. She wanted to tell the truth immediately, reclaim her place as a mother, and start building the life that was stolen from them. But on the other hand, her rational mind reminded her of the complications. Carlos had an established life, an adoptive family that loved him. Sarah, his adoptive mother, clearly cared deeply about him. Revealing the truth now could traumatize the boy, tear him away from everything he knew. Hillary found herself imagining scenarios. What if she simply kept the truth a secret, contenting herself with being a family friend, watching her son grow up from afar? The thought made his heart clench with pain. Or she could fight for legal custody, dragging everyone through a painful and potentially destructive court process. Every option felt wrong in some way. Telling the truth right away could be selfish. Keeping it a secret would be torture for her and would deprive Carlos of knowing her true story. Fighting in court could harm everyone. As the night wore on, Hillary found herself praying for wisdom, for a sign of what to do. She watched her son's sleeping face, memorizing every detail, fearing that this might be her only chance. When the first rays of sunlight began to shine through the window, Hillary still didn't have a clear answer, but she knew that whatever her decision was, it would have to be made with Thomas's best interests in mind. He was the priority now, not his own desires or his past pain. With a deep sigh, Hillary prepared herself to face the day ahead, knowing that her actions in the next few hours could change several lives forever. The doorbell rang, making Hillary jump. She opened the door to find Sarah, Carlos's adoptive mother, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a moment, the two women stared at each other, a palpable tension in the air. "Where is he?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Hillary led her to the living room, where Carlos was still sleeping peacefully. Sarah ran to the couch, kneeling next to the boy and gently stroking his hair. "Thank you for taking care of him," Sarah whispered, looking at Hillary with genuine gratitude. It was at that moment that Hillary felt the weight of her discovery pressing down on her chest. She knew she needed to tell the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Sarah," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." The next few hours were an emotional roller coaster. Hillary revealed the whole story: Thomas's kidnapping, years of desperate searching, and the incredible coincidence that brought them together. Sarah listened in shock, silent tears streaming down her face. I didn't know," Sarah stammered. "When we adopted him, we were told he had been abandoned." Hillary's initial anger towards her adoptive family dissipated when she saw the genuine love in Sarah's eyes. She realized that this woman was also a victim of circumstances. Together they spent the night discussing what to do, their voices low so as not to wake Carlos. They cried together, shared stories about the boy they both loved, and slowly began to form a plan. By the time the sun rose, illuminating the room in soft light, Hillary and Sarah had reached a tentative agreement. They would tell Carlos the truth together, with the help of a child therapist. They would share custody, allowing the boy to maintain his ties to his adoptive family while building a relationship with his biological mother. It wouldn't be easy. They both knew that. There would be legal, emotional, and practical challenges ahead. But looking at the boy who slept peacefully, oblivious to the emotional storm around him, both Hillary and Sarah knew they would do anything to ensure his happiness. The day dawned bright and clear, as if the universe was celebrating the miracle that was about to happen. Hillary, Sarah, and Carlos sat in a welcoming office, child therapist Dr. Martinez gently guiding them through this pivotal moment. Carlos looked curiously from one woman to another, feeling the tension in the air but unable to fully understand what was happening. Sarah held his hand, offering silent comfort. "Carlos," Dr. Martinez began softly, "you know there are many different types of families, right?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide and attentive. "Well, today you're going to discover something very special about your family," she continued. "This lady here, Hillary, she's your biological mother." Carlos frowned, confused. But Mommy Sarah is my mommy," he said, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Yes, darling," Sarah replied, tears in her eyes. "I am your mother and always will be. But Hillary is the woman who gave birth to you." Hillary felt her heart quicken when Carlos turned his eyes to her. She could see the confusion, the uncertainty, but also a spark of recognition. I dreamed of you," Carlos said softly, surprising everyone. "Sometimes I dreamed of a dark-haired lady hugging me." The tears that Hillary had been holding back finally spilled over. "Oh, Thomas." "Carlos," she quickly corrected. "I've dreamed of you every day for the past 5 years." Slowly, hesitantly, Carlos stood up and walked over to Hillary. He studied her for a moment, then, to everyone's surprise, extended his arms for a hug. Hillary wrapped him gently, feeling the warmth of her son in her arms for the first time in 5 long years. It was as if a lost piece of his heart had finally been found. "It's okay, my love," she whispered, stroking his hair. "We have all the time in the world right now." Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of emotions, joy at the reunion, sadness at the loss Hillary had suffered, and a little fear for the future. But seeing the love in both their eyes, she knew that somehow they would make it work. Dr. Martinez smiled softly, knowing this was just the beginning of a long journey for this newly expanded family. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to be made, and lots of love to be shared. But at that moment, in that sunny room, mother and son were finally reunited. And for Hillary, Carlos, and Sarah, that was all that mattered. Pedro was sitting in his favorite armchair, his eyes fixed on the wall in front of him, but his mind was miles away. The last 24 hours had turned his world upside down, and he was still trying to process everything that had happened. He loved Sarah. Of that he was sure. They had been together for 5 years, building a shared life and dreams. The engagement ring hidden in her drawer was proof of that. But now, that certainty was tainted by a shadow of doubt and betrayal. The revelation that Carlos, the boy they had raised and loved as a son, was actually the biological son of another woman, Hillary, left him stunned. How could Sarah hide this from him for so long? How could she build her family on such a big lie? Pedro found himself replaying every moment of the past 5 years, looking for signs he might have missed. Were there times when Sarah seemed distant? Times when she hesitated when talking about Carlos's past? He couldn't remember anything suspicious, and that disturbed him even more. Part of him wanted to scream, demand explanations, maybe even pack his bags and leave. But another part, the part that still saw Carlos's smile every morning, that remembered the love in Sarah's eyes, hesitated. After all, the love they shared was real, wasn't it? The bond they had formed as a family was genuine, even if its origins were complicated. Pedro found himself caught between the love he felt for his family and the feeling of betrayal that threatened to engulf him. He knew that the decisions he made in the coming days would shape not only his future, but Carlos and Sarah's as well. The confusion in her heart was palpable, a constant battle between forgiving and resenting, between moving forward and looking back. The moment that Pedro feared and longed for finally arrived. Sarah was sitting in front of him, her eyes red from crying, ready to tell him the whole truth. The air between them was thick with tension, years of secrets about to be revealed. "I never wanted to hurt you," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "When we adopted Carlos, I truly believed he had been abandoned." Pedro listened in silence as Sarah told the complete story, how she discovered the truth about Carlos's origins just a year after adoption, the paralyzing fear of losing the son he already loved so much, the agonizing decision to keep the secret, not just from Pedro, but from everyone. As the narrative unfolded, Pedro felt a roller coaster of emotions: anger at the lie, compassion for the impossible dilemma Sarah faced, fear for the uncertain future that now awaited them. "Why didn't you trust me?" Pedro finally asked, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "We could have faced this together." Sarah looked down, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was scared," she admitted. "Fear of losing Carlos, fear of losing you. The more time passed, the harder it became to tell the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Pedro knew they were at a turning point. The past could not be changed, but the future was still in his hands. How they would deal with this newly revealed truth would define not only their relationship, but Carlos's well-being as well. As Pedro struggled to process the revelations about Carlos and Sarah, a long-buried memory began to emerge from the depths of his mind. A story from his own past that he had tried hard to forget, but that now seemed painfully relevant. With shaking hands, Pedro opened an old box at the bottom of his closet. Inside, hidden beneath stacks of old papers, was a yellowed photograph. In it, a much younger Pedro smiled next to a woman he hadn't seen in decades. "Who is she?" Sarah asked softly, noticing the troubled expression on Pedro's face. Pedro took a deep breath, knowing it was time to confront his own past. Was my college girlfriend, and the mother of my son." The shock on Sarah's face was palpable. Do you have a son?" Pedro nodded slowly. "Yes. He was born when I was just 20 years old. I was scared. I didn't feel ready to be a father. So, I ran away. I left everything behind." Tears were now flowing freely down Peter's face. "I spent years trying to convince myself that I did the right thing, that they would be better off without me. But the truth is, I was a coward." Sarah listened silently, processing this unexpected revelation. Suddenly, Pedro's reaction to the truth about Carlos took on a new dimension. It wasn't just about the lie. It was about facing the echoes of his own past. "I never saw them again," Pedro continued. "But now, seeing Carlos, knowing what Hillary went through, I can't help but think about what could have been different if I had stayed, if I had been brave enough to be a father." The morning sun filtered through the curtains in Dr. Oliveira's office, casting a soft glow on Hillary and Pedro, who sat side by side on the leather sofa. It was their first couples therapy session, a step they both knew was necessary but filled them with apprehension. Dr. Oliveira observed the couple for a moment, noticing the tension in their shoulders, the way they avoided each other's eyes. "Why don't we start by talking about what brought you here today?" she suggested gently. Hillary was the first to speak, her voice shaking. We discovered some difficult truths recently, about our son, Carlos, and about Pedro's past." Pedro nodded, adding hoarsely, "It seems like we've built our lives on secrets, and now we don't know how to move forward." In the weeks that followed, Hillary and Pedro delved deeply into their individual and shared stories. Hillary spoke about the paralyzing fear of losing Carlos, the crushing weight of the secret she carried for years. Pedro, in turn, faced the ghosts of his past, the son he abandoned so long ago and the guilt that has consumed him ever since. With each session, layers of hurt, resentment, and fear were peeled away, revealing the raw wounds beneath. There were tears, muffled screams, and moments of deafening silence. But there were also moments of understanding, glimpses of empathy that shone like beacons in the darkness. "What do you feel when you think about the son you left behind?" Dr. Oliveira asked Pedro in a particularly intense session. Pedro closed his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shame. A shame so deep that sometimes I feel like it's going to swallow me." Hillary, surprising even herself, reached out and took Pedro's hand. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "I carried that same shame for hiding the truth about Carlos." It was a turning point. For the first time, they saw in each other not just the spouse who had hurt them, but a human being struggling with their own flaws and fears. As the weeks turned into months, Hillary and Pedro began to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual understanding. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the past seemed crushing, moments when confidence seemed like an unattainable goal. But they persevered. They learned to communicate in an open and vulnerable way. They practiced forgiveness, not just with each other, but with themselves. And slowly, the old wounds began to heal. In one of the last sessions, Dr. Oliveira asked them to share something they had learned during this process. Hillary took a deep breath. "I learned that our mistakes don't define us. It's what we do after them that matters." Pedro gently squeezed her hand. "And I've learned that it's never too late to do the right thing. To be the man, the husband, and the father I always wanted to be." When they left the office that day, Hillary and Pedro walked hand in hand. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in a long time, they felt truly united, ready to face the future together. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen of Hillary and Pedro's house on a Saturday morning. The table was set for 5 people, a sight that still seemed surreal to the couple. Today would be the first family breakfast with everyone present. Hillary, Pedro, Carlos, Hillary, Carlos's biological mother, and Sarah, adoptive mother. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, causing everyone to hold their breath for a moment. Pedro went to answer the door, welcoming Hillary and Sarah with a nervous but genuine smile. "Welcome," he said, leading them into the kitchen where Hillary and Carlos waited. The air was thick with expectation and a hint of apprehension. Carlos, now aware of the entire situation, looked from one mother to another, his big eyes full of curiosity and a bit of confusion. Hillary was the first to break the ice. "I'm glad you could come," she said, pouring coffee for everyone. "Carlos was really excited for this breakfast, wasn't he, darling?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "I made pancakes," he announced proudly, pointing to a slightly crooked but fragrant pile in the center of the table. Carlos's innocent comment seemed to dissipate some of the tension. Soon, the conversation began to flow, although a little hesitantly at first. They talked about Carlos's school, about work, about the weather, safe topics that allowed everyone to get used to the new dynamic. As the meal progressed, moments of genuine connection began to emerge. Hillary shared a funny story from when Carlos was a baby, making everyone laugh. Sarah and Hillary discovered they had similar taste in books and began exchanging recommendations. Peter, watching all this, felt a surge of gratitude and hope. After breakfast, while Carlos showed Hillary and Sarah his room, the adults gathered in the living room for a more serious conversation. "I know this situation isn't easy for anyone," Hillary began, "but I think we can all agree that Carlos's well-being is our priority." Everyone nodded in agreement. "Maybe we can establish a routine," Sarah suggested. Specific days for visits, alternating holidays. And we could have more family meals like this, Hillary added, so that Carlos feels comfortable with all of us together. Pedro, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. I know I've made mistakes in the past, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm committed to doing what's best for Carlos, for all of us. The rest of the morning was spent coming up with a plan, discussing expectations, and setting boundaries. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were moments of tension and disagreement. But there was also a collective desire to make things work, to create an environment of love and stability for Carlos. As Hillary and Sarah were getting ready to leave, Carlos ran over to hug each of them. You're going to be back soon, right? He asked, looking from one to the other. Of course I do, darling, Hillary replied, exchanging a knowing look with Sarah and Hillary. At that moment, watching his son surrounded by so much love, Pedro felt a wave of emotion hit him. This was not the kind of family he imagined he would have, but it was a family, united by the love of a child and the desire to overcome the past. As they waved goodbye to Hillary and Sarah, Hillary intertwined her fingers with Pedro's. One step at a time, she murmured. Pedro nodded, gently squeezing her hand. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright and full of possibilities.